The doctor zipped the body bag closed. The battle was over. 8 men had been pulled out of the jungle alive. 3 helicopters had been shot down. The man on the ground in front of the doctor showed no signs of life, no pulse, no breathing, body covered in blood from wounds too numerous to count. The doctor made a note. Kia. Killed in action. He was about to move on. And then the body moved. Not much. Just enough. The man inside the bag, the man the doctor had just declared dead, gathered every last fragment of strength in his destroyed body and did the only thing he could do. He spit in the doctor's face. The doctor froze. He looked down. The eyes were open. Roy Benavidez was not dead. He had been shot in the leg, the face, and the head during his first 75 yards of combat. He had been shot in the stomach. He had taken grenade fragments in his back. He had been clubbed in the jaw with a rifle but hard enough to break it. He had been stabbed through the arm with a bayonet. He had taken wounds in both thighs. He had crawled, dragged, carried, and fought for 6 hours in a jungle clearing while 1,000 North Vietnamese soldiers tried to kill him. And he had refused, through every single one of those hours, through every single one of those wounds, to stop. When they counted the wounds later at the hospital, the number was 37. 37 separate wounds. And Roy Benavidez had still saved 8 lives. President Ronald Reagan would later stand in front of the cameras after presenting him with the Medal of Honor and say something that has never been forgotten. If the story of his heroism were a movie script, you would not believe it. He was right. But this is not a movie. This is what actually happened. Roy Perez Benavidez was born on August 5, 1935, in a place called Lindenau, near Cuero, Texas. His father was a Mexican-American sharecropper. His mother was Yaqui, descended from a Native American people from the borderlands between the United States and Mexico. They were poor in the way that people in rural Texas in the 1930s could be poor, working land they didn't own, dependent on harvests that didn't always come. When Roy was 2 years old, his father died of tuberculosis. When Roy was 7, his mother died of tuberculosis too. He and his younger brother Roger went to live with their uncle and aunt in El Campo, Texas. Their grandfather was there. There were 8 cousins. The house was full and the money was not. Roy Benavidez grew up shining shoes at the local bus station. He picked sugar beets in Colorado fields during the summers, cotton in the Texas heat, whatever work would bring money home. He dropped out of school at 15, not because he didn't want to learn, but because the family needed him to work. He was not a boy who had been given much by the world. He was not a boy who expected anything to be given to him. What he had instead was something harder to describe, a quality that the people who knew him would try to put into words for the rest of their lives and never quite manage. A refusal to accept limits. A conviction that what needed to be done could always be done if you were willing to pay the price. It would take him a long time to find the place where that quality could be used for something. When he found it, it changed everything. In 1952, at 17 years old, Roy Benavidez joined the Texas Army National Guard. The Korean War was on. He transferred to active duty in 1955. He went through airborne training. He was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg. He married a woman named Ilaria Coy in 1959. For the first decade of his military career, Roy Benavidez was a good soldier. Disciplined, capable, the kind of man his superiors trusted and his fellow soldiers respected. He completed rotation in South Korea. He completed rotation in Germany. Then, in 1965, he was sent to Vietnam for the first time. Not as a combat soldier. As an advisor, embedded with a South Vietnamese army regiment, helping them train, watching them fight, doing the quiet and necessary work of building another country's military capacity from the inside. One day, on a patrol with the Vietnamese regiment, Roy Benavidez stepped on a land mine. He described what happened next simply. I woke up in the Philippine Islands, in Clark Air Force Base. He had been evacuated unconscious. The damage to his spine was severe. When they transferred him to the hospital at Fort Sam Houston in Texas, the doctors delivered the verdict in the same clinical language that doctors always use when they don't know how else to say something terrible. The damage was too severe. He might never walk again. They began preparing his medical discharge papers. Roy Benavidez had other ideas. Every night, after the lights went out in his hospital ward, Roy Benavidez got out of bed. The doctors had told him not to. The physical therapists had told him not to. His body, still recovering from spinal damage, was not ready. The pain was real and it was serious, and pushing through it could make things worse. He didn't care. He later described what he did in the darkness of that ward in the precise, matter-of-fact way he described everything. He would crawl out of bed using his elbows and chin. Drag himself to the wall. Push himself up against it. Try to wiggle his toes. His feet. Work his way upward, inch by inch, night after night, in the dark, in pain, with the ward full of other soldiers, many of them permanently paralyzed, many of them missing limbs, watching him and encouraging him in whispers because they understood exactly what he was trying to do. Some nights, he later admitted, it left him in tears. He did it anyway. He also described what he saw on the television in his ward, the anti-war protests, the flag burnings, the media coverage of the Vietnam War that portrayed American soldiers as criminals or fools. That, he said, added something to the pain. Not despair. Something closer to its opposite. Anger. Determination. He was not going to let that be the story. He was not going to let his country down. He was not going to let the men he had trained with, fought beside, watched go back to that jungle, go back without him. After more than a year of hospitalization, Roy Benavidez walked out of Fort Sam Houston on his own 2 feet. His wife Ilaria was at his side. He had proved the doctors wrong. He applied to the Special Forces. He was accepted. He became a Green Beret. And in January 1968, he returned to Vietnam. He was assigned to Detachment B 56 of the 5th Special Forces Group at Loc Ninh, a forward operating base near the Cambodian border. The Studies and Observations Group, SOG, was one of the most classified special operations units in the Vietnam War. They operated in enemy territory, gathered intelligence, disrupted North Vietnamese supply lines along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The missions were dangerous in ways that most of the war was not. Small teams. Deep in enemy-controlled jungle. No conventional backup within reach. Roy Benavidez knew exactly where he had come back to. He was at Mass that morning. May 2, 1968. A Thursday. He was a devout Catholic. Morning Mass when he could get it. Not performance, not habit. Faith that he carried the same way he carried everything, quietly, completely, without needing to explain it to anyone. He heard the radio call while he was still near the chapel. A 12-man Special Forces team had been inserted by helicopter into the jungle west of Loc Ninh, 3 American Green Berets and 9 Montagnard tribesmen who fought alongside them. Their mission was reconnaissance. Intelligence gathering on North Vietnamese Army activity in the area. They had walked into a battalion. A full North Vietnamese Army battalion, approximately 1,000 soldiers, had caught them. 3 helicopters had already tried to extract them. All 3 had been driven back by the volume of fire. The team was surrounded, taking casualties, running out of options. Over the radio, one word came through clearly above everything else. Get us out of here. Roy Benavidez walked to the 4th helicopter as it was preparing to attempt another rescue. He had no orders to be there. He had no authorization to board. He grabbed a medical kit and a knife, only a knife, and climbed in. The helicopter couldn't land. The ground fire was too intense, rifles, automatic weapons, the kind of volume that made landing a death sentence for the aircraft and everyone inside it. The pilot held the Huey in a hover as low as he dared. Roy Benavidez looked at the ground below. At the jungle. At the sound of weapons fire coming from every direction. And he jumped. He hit the ground running. He had 75 meters to cover between where he landed and where the team was pinned down. 75 meters of open ground with 1,000 North Vietnamese soldiers and their weapons aimed at anything that moved. He was shot in the right leg before he'd gone 20 yards. He kept running. A grenade explosion hit him in the face and head with shrapnel. He kept running. He reached the team. What he found when he got there was worse than the radio had communicated. Men down everywhere. The team leader dead. Several of the Montagnards dead. The survivors pinned behind whatever cover they could find, ammunition running low, no way out. Benavidez took charge. He repositioned the surviving men. Directed their fire. Called for the helicopter. Threw smoke grenades to mark the landing zone. Under fire the entire time, moving, shouting commands, pulling wounded men toward the extraction point. He carried and dragged half the wounded team members to the helicopter himself. Then, as the aircraft began to move to pick up the remaining men, he ran alongside it. Providing covering fire. On foot. Next to a moving helicopter. Under direct enemy fire. He had been on the ground for less than 30 minutes. He had already been shot twice and hit by grenade fragments. He had not stopped moving. The team leader's body was still on the ground. And on that body were classified documents, intelligence materials that could not be left for the North Vietnamese. The kind of information that gets other men killed. Benavidez went back. He ran to the dead team leader's position under intensifying fire. He was shot in the stomach. Grenade fragments hit him in the back at almost the same moment. He picked up the documents. As he turned to go, the helicopter, the one carrying the wounded he had just loaded, was hit. The pilot was killed. The aircraft came down, crashing in the jungle clearing. Benavidez was gut-shot, shrapnel in his back, already hit 4 times, and now there was a crashed helicopter full of wounded men in front of him. He went to the wreckage. He pulled the survivors out. He gathered them into a defensive perimeter. He moved around that perimeter, moving around it, not hiding inside it, distributing water, distributing ammunition, talking to the men, doing the specific and irreplaceable thing that a leader does when everything has gone wrong. He gave them a reason to keep fighting. He called in air strikes. He directed helicopter gunships. He coordinated the entire defense of that position from the ground, wounded 4 times, in the middle of a jungle clearing, surrounded by an enemy battalion. 45 minutes passed. An hour. 2 hours. Then came the moment that separated this day from every other day in the history of American Special Operations. An NVA soldier who Benavidez had believed was dead rose from the ground behind him and swung his AK-47 like a club. The rifle but hit Benavidez in the jaw hard enough to break it and knock him to the ground. The soldier lunged with his bayonet. Benavidez caught the bayonet with his right hand. The blade went through his hand. With his left hand, the hand that still worked, he pulled out his knife. He killed the soldier. Then he stood up and kept going. The second extraction helicopter got in. Benavidez loaded the wounded. Every man he could reach, he carried or dragged to that aircraft. On the way to the helicopter with a seriously wounded American soldier over his shoulder, he spotted 2 NVA soldiers running toward the aircraft from an angle the door gunner couldn't cover. He killed both of them. He loaded the last of the wounded. He made one final sweep of the perimeter, one last circuit of that clearing, to make sure every classified document had been collected or destroyed, to make sure no wounded man had been left behind. Only then, after 6 hours on the ground, after 37 separate wounds, did Roy Benavidez allow himself to be helped onto the aircraft. He could no longer stand. He could barely breathe. He was losing blood from wounds in his leg, his stomach, his back, both thighs, his face, his head, his hand, his arm. When the helicopter landed and the medics came to assess casualties, they looked at Roy Benavidez and made the only reasonable conclusion available to them. He was dead. They put him in a body bag. They zipped it closed. And then Roy Benavidez, who had refused to accept that he would never walk again, who had crawled out of his hospital bed in the dark every night for a year, who had jumped from a helicopter into 1,000 enemy soldiers with nothing but a knife, gathered the last fragment of something left inside him. And spit in the doctor's face. He survived. Somehow, after everything, he survived. He was evacuated to Fort Sam Houston, the same hospital where they had once told him he would never walk again. He spent months recovering. The wounds healed, or most of them did. 2 pieces of shrapnel stayed in his heart permanently. 1 lung was permanently damaged. His commander believed what Benavidez had done deserved the Medal of Honor. But the paperwork for the Medal of Honor required eyewitness testimony, and his commander believed Benavidez was going to die before the award could be processed. He was put in for the Distinguished Service Cross instead, the second highest decoration in the United States Army. Benavidez recovered. Years passed. He retired from the Army. He raised his family. He lived quietly. In 1973, a Special Forces officer named Ralph Drake reviewed the records and concluded that what Benavidez had done warranted the Medal of Honor. But the time limit on the award had passed. An appeal to Congress got an exemption. But the Army Decorations Board said no. They needed an eyewitness. There were no living witnesses. Roy Benavidez believed he was the only survivor. He was wrong. His radioman, a man named Brian O'Connor, had been severely wounded and evacuated from the jungle that day. He had been so badly hurt that no one had properly debriefed him before he was sent home. O'Connor had gone on to live quietly in the Fiji Islands. In 1980, he was on holiday in Australia. He picked up a newspaper. He read an article about Roy Benavidez from a Texas paper that had been picked up by the international press. O'Connor contacted Benavidez immediately. He submitted a 10-page eyewitness account. On February 24, 1981, President Ronald Reagan presented Master Sergeant Roy P. Benavidez with the Medal of Honor in a ceremony at the Pentagon. Reagan turned to the cameras and said what needed to be said. If the story of his heroism were a movie script, you would not believe it. Benavidez stepped up to. After the ceremony, Reagan asked Benavidez to do something. He asked him to speak to the young people of America. Roy Benavidez took that request to heart in a way few men would have. For the rest of his life, he traveled the country speaking at schools, military bases, community events, talking to kids about education, about hard work, about love of country. About what it meant to be American. He had been a high school dropout who picked cotton and shined shoes. He had been a paralyzed man who taught himself to walk again in the dark. He had been the man in the body bag who spit his way back to life. He was not going to let any young American believe that where they started determined where they could go. In 1983, the federal government tried to cut off his disability payments, 2 pieces of shrapnel still in his heart, 1 lung permanently damaged, as part of a budget review. The determination was that, despite everything, he was capable of finding employment. Benavidez was characteristically direct about it. "I don't like to use my Medal of Honor for political purposes or personal gain," he said. "But if they can do this to me, what will they do to all the others?" Reagan was personally contacted. 10 days later, the government reversed its decision. Roy Benavidez died on November 29, 1998. He was 63 years old. The shrapnel in his heart, the damaged lung, the accumulated cost of 37 wounds caught up with him in the end. He is buried at Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery in San Antonio, Texas. The same city where the doctors once told him he would never walk again. There is a school named after him in El Campo, Texas. There is a building at the Pentagon. There is a U.S. Army Reserve Center in his name. The state of Texas designated April 24 as Roy Benavidez Day. But the best memorial to Roy Benavidez is not in stone or in legislation. It is in what he himself said, in every speech he ever gave, to every young person who ever sat in front of